Hello, everybody. Yes, everybody can hear me, right? So as Derek already introduced, I'll be talking a little bit very briefly about the DFM Cambodia Scoping Phase, what basically happened. And I will also try to, I will explain what happened, what we did, how we did it, and a little bit of the lessons and what we learned very briefly. I started out thinking that I'm going to finish the presentation in 30 minutes, but I can already see that I have quite a few slides lined up, so it probably will take about 40 minutes. I'm trying to strike a balance between content, so the findings of the scoping phase, and the process that we followed, linked to the lessons learned in terms of the kinds of tools that we used and the adaptations that we followed. So I'm going to try and balance the two, and I'm always happy to take questions and any discussion points at the end of the presentation. To start with, I spent about 5 months in Cambodia, based in Phnom Penh, the capital, from October 2019 to March 2020. I was, as Derek already mentioned, I was supported on the ground by CIRD, it's led by Serebiat. So I was provided with transport facilities, translations, which is very important, and then general research support, and of course, workshop coordination and other meeting coordination on the ground. The project in Cambodia was advised by Kyoko, Derek, Melissa, and Ben. Also, at the especially towards the end, when we organized the end of scoping phase workshop, Ben was able to fly in as well as Kyoko and Derek. So I will talk a little bit about the workshop later. So in terms of different activities that we carried out, we started off with the literature review, like most everyone else, I think, who's the different country teams. And then this literature review included quite a lot of published data, starting from journal publications to real literature, and secondary data in the form of quantitative data. So this would be things like production data, number of fishermen, number of processors, not so much trade data. Unfortunately for Cambodia, getting hold of trade and marketing, especially export data, still proved to be quite a bit of a challenge. So this is secondary data is predominantly quantitative data that would help us understand some of the trends in production over the last 5 years, and also the changes that had taken place. I will present some of that data also later on. In terms of primary data, we used, I could say, a mixed method, mixed basket. So we started off with semi-structured interview guides that were actually developed by DFM Global, with slight adaptations and adjustments as we went along. So we managed to complete 58 such semi-structured interviews, predominantly around the Tonle Sap, the Great Lake of Tonle Sap in Cambodia, where the inland fisheries dominate the fish production in Cambodia. So most of these interviews happened in the provinces and the districts around the lake. And then towards the end of my stay, in December, January, we did also visit the coastal provinces, and we managed to go to 2 provinces on the coast. But in terms of production, again, the processed or dried fish production coming from the marine sector in Cambodia is relatively lower to the freshwater inland water processed products. So we've used interview guides for the fishermen or the fish producers, for processors, for retailers and wholesalers, and yeah, for these four primary categories. These were the again, these are the guides that were developed by DFM Global. I'm here talking a little bit about, lessons learned and my experience in administering these questionnaires. So obviously, to begin with, translating the questions and to trying to contextualize it to Cambodia took quite a bit of time. And here there's the added complication that I had, where I have very limited experience and knowledge of the context of Cambodian fisheries. Plus, my experience here in Sri Lanka is to do with the sea fishing, the marine fishing, and not so much the inland fishing. So I found quite a few differences in the two subsectors, within the two subsectors, and how these two subsectors were organized and operated as well. So at the beginning, it was a bit of a challenge to translate, not just the word translation, word to word, like the verbatim translation, but the meaning and the context and the subtext behind the questions took us a bit of time. So it was a bit of a trial and error at the beginning. But then I think as we moved along the interviews and we went from one province to the other, we managed to get a hang of what sort of questions worked out and what sort of questions didn't work out. And one of the main challenges we faced again with these semi-structured interviews was in trying to differentiate the wholesalers, the retailers, and the processors. The way the Cambodian processed fish or dried fish sector is organized, there were lots of instances where the processor was selling her or his processed fish at a small market or a small district market or a small village market. Plus, they would also deal with a middleman who would then buy from them and send the fish, that's the processed products, out of the district, out of the province, sometimes out of the country as well. And then the differentiation or drawing a line between retailers and wholesalers was even more difficult because I don't think I met any wholesaler who did exclusively wholesale business. They had on the side some kind of retail business happening while they were engaging with in the wholesale, and this was I saw this in the big markets in Phnom Penh, the capital, as well. So then trying to figure out which interview guide should be used was becoming a bit of a concern at the beginning. And sometimes we ended up just selecting one by asking them, okay, so would you consider yourself a wholesale or a retail businessman? And most of the time they would actually say retail. So we start off with the retail, but then we figure out, okay, they sell bulk, or they actually send bulk to Thailand or Vietnam, and they were sourcing bulk from like some of the medium level factories or processing units in certain parts of the country, like Battambang or Siem Reap. So it was becoming so this is one of the challenges that we face. And I mean looking back, I still don't know whether we made the correct call on these questions. But also, in the interview guides, I'm sure you all have also gone through the guides. Most of the questions do overlap. So then there isn't, there's nothing much lost by opting for one or the other. So that's a little bit about the semi-structured interviews. And then we've conducted about 18 key person interviews with experts in the sector, ranging from the government fisheries administration. So that's like the Department of Fisheries, and also there is a research arm of the Department of Fisheries that specializes in inland fisheries. So we've spoken to those officials, and then independent consultants, UN agencies that have an interest, or they've worked in the fisheries sector broadly, and in certain instances in the processed sector as well, especially focusing on value chain development and nutrition. food security, food safety, and nutrition. So these seem to be the interest areas for the non-governmental agencies that were interested in the processing sector in Cambodia. There was quite a bit of research that was taking place, as well as quite a few action or project implementation that was taking place in terms of trying to upgrade the quality of the processed products. Then towards the end of my stay, we decided to conduct a rapid survey targeting 40 traders in one of the main wholesale markets that trade processed products in Phnom Penh, in the capital, called the Urusai market. This market is not exclusively, it does not trade processed products exclusively, but it has about 80 to 90 stalls that engage in wholesale processed fish trading in Phnom Penh. And we ask questions like, where do you get your processed products from? Where does it go? How is it circulating internally? Does it go out of the country? How does it go out of the country? Volume of production, a little bit about labor relations. So it was about a 20 to 30 question, a very short, rapid survey. Why we came up with this survey was because we felt, we weren't really getting a clear enough picture about the movement of these processed products in Cambodia. There are some studies that do document this from the 90s and early 2000s. These are mainly market studies. And they are quite in-depth and comprehensive, but things have changed quite a bit since those studies were published, and none of them are really comprehensive in a way. They're not, nationally applicable. So these were the reasons, and also we went decided on a rapid survey mainly because the traders in this particular market, we all know that traders are quite difficult to get hold of to conduct any sort of survey. So they would maximum give us like 10 to 15 to 20 minutes if it's a survey that we wanted to cover a larger group of people. If it was targeted and we required only to talk to 5 or 10 people, 10 traders, I think then the scenario is slightly different. But if we want to get a larger, broader, more representative sample, then we decided this was the better way to go about this. I will present some of the findings from the survey also later on. And then we complemented these other tools and other methods of data collection with 10 in-depth discussions with female traders at the Urusai market. About 70 to 80% of the traders, or maybe even about 85% of the traders at the Urusai market who deal in processed products are women. And we saw this, and we were I personally was quite interested in finding out a little bit more about the history of these women traders. And my interest is also coming from my being quite familiar with the Sri Lankan context, where we do not see this many women engaged in processed product trade, especially at the wholesale level. So I found this quite interesting to see these women in these markets, and I also realized that that region anyway has strong links between women and traders, or women being traders. So this was an interesting parallel or opposition to me as well. So we've conducted 10 in-depth discussions with these women, trying to understand, as I said, their occupation histories, their interests, especially their aspirations for future, intergenerational social network sharing, and who was supporting them, what the challenges that they were facing, things like that. And then I've also taken quite a lot of photographs and made short video clips of the different production methods or processing methods, different sites, different people, and in general the different spaces that this processing, the DFM is dealing with. I've also maintained a diary, but it's not comprehensive, not systematic in any way. but there are also then my reflections, my take on certain things, the questions that I did not have answers at the beginning, but then slowly I started getting my head around what was happening, and then how things slowly started becoming clear, but then they became confusing again. I was trying to map that journey through keeping notes, separate notes for myself. So the way we organized, I always had a translator that assisted with asking the questions, and the translation happened on the spot. And I was taking notes for the semi-structured interviews and the key person interviews. Some of the key person interviews I could do them in English, but all the other data collection, the rest of the data collection happened in Khmer, in the local language. I mean, I don't think this applies to many of the other contexts that DFM operates in, but definitely for me, the lack of language and the lack of in situ embedded kind of knowledge and experience about the context, definitely, at least in the beginning, created quite a lot of challenges. So this is how we've organized, and then towards the end of my stay there, so this is February, March, I presented at a general forum, a think tank kind of space, some of the initial findings from my research, and got some feedback. And then on the 2nd or 3rd of March, I think 3rd of March, we had a half-day workshop. We conducted a half-day workshop in Cambodia, in Phnom Penh, coordinated by CIRD, Seriviat and his team, where we shared the initial findings and got feedback or validation, or we tried to triangulate some of the trends, emerging trends, and to make sure that we are not leaving any glaring gaps in our analysis. And for this, the government representatives, we got the non-government representatives, as well as quite a number of processors themselves from the provinces, which was quite useful, meaningful, and great to present the initial findings back to them, and to get there and to get quite a good discussion going on the emerging findings. And we produced a workshop report as well, which we still haven't shared with the participants, but the plan is to share we documented the discussions and to share it back with the participants. And now I'm moving on a little bit to how I've gone about storing the data, the different kinds of data that we've accumulated over the last year or so. So most of the literature, as we already discussed in the last webinar, is in Zotero. I've updated it as I found more sources, but there's I think a few that needs to be still uploaded. So for the literature, I've used Zotero, and for files, the Word documents, the qualitative data, I've anonymized them. And I've used a numbering sequence. So the province initials of the province, like Siem Reap, would be SAT, fish producer FP0102. So I've anonymized it, and I've stored the details, the personal details linked to this reference number in a separate place, in a separate file as an Excel document. And I've stored the data, the qualitative and the quantitative data separately in another folder, and that data is all anonymized already. I've linked the same reference numbers for the qualitative notes of the same structured interviews to my pictures as well. So all the pictures are tagged in folders, they are stored in folders, and the pictures that I've taken of the processing and all that, they are directly linked to the people that we've spoken to, but again, they're anonymized, and in most cases the faces can't be seen, so that we don't run into any ethical issues. So for now they are stored in Dropbox, but I think soon we are going to shift it to the central storage of DFM Global. As I've said, I've maintained a separate data monitoring sheet with all the respondent details, and then the photographs I've already explained, and the qualitative data is also stored in NVivo. So I'm using NVivo for the analysis, the qualitative data analysis, so that NVivo also becomes a place for storage, storing data. Analysis, as I said, the qualitative analysis, I'm using NVivo, and this is just one quick cut of the of all the qualitative data using the semi-structured interview guide that of DFM. And these are the this is like a word association, and I've brought it out into a word cloud. And the so this is just one way of cutting the full database. I've taken a screenshot of the coding, the way I've been going about coding my data. So this is the way I've approached coding for this project. It's like a ground up kind of, bottom up kind of coding. So rather than going with the coding categories, preset coding categories, I've let it emerge from the data. But keeping in mind that we've used the interview guides, the DFM interview guides, semi-structured interview guides to elicit this data. So you can already see lots of the categories, lots of the codes actually that is directly linked to the kinds of questions that we've asked and the kinds of questions that DFM is interested in. Some of the, I guess, we did have questions about identity also in the interview guide, but I think we managed to add a little bit more nuance into identity, the questions on identity, different categories, and how these play out in the processing, fishing and processing activities. So this is quick. I want to quickly show how I've gone about, and of course I can lump these very specific, very small categories into bigger overarching themes, coding themes as well, quite easily. So I've done that for the broad categories of marketing, labor, fresh fish production, and fish processing. But there are different ways then that these categories can be amalgamated depending on what we want to present and what we want to analyze. Okay, so I'm slowly moving on to the findings. One of the ongoing discussions we've had within the team, DFM Cambodia, is how do we define dried fish in Cambodia? And you might have noticed already that I keep using the term processed rather than dried. So the way we've drawn the line is that anything that needs refrigeration or that's steamed would not be dried or processed. But everything else, so that means dried, salted, made into fish paste, fermented, yeah, so and fish sauce as well. So all those would fall into the dried fish category in Cambodia. Again, coming from Sri Lanka, I found this wide range of products that were available in the market and in the processing units quite intriguing, actually. So the way we've organized the findings and the analysis for now is that there are these four main overarching themes where we're trying to organize the data. And today I will only be talking about the sub-theme economy because in the interest of time. So in terms of economy also, so some of the analysis points that the analysis is throwing up is in terms of volume of production, how this differs, where is this production taking place, and who's engaging in this production. Then there are the labor relations, which seem quite dominated by family labor in most units, but also there were then the medium-sized processing units like the one in the picture here, which employs on a temporary basis or in a daily wage, daily paid kind of basis, about 15 to 20 people. Again, quite a lot of women and young boys. The men were not really present in these processing or engaging in processing, except to lift the big sacks or the big boxes of fish and transporting. So very briefly, I will. So this is the analysis that we are drawing out from the published studies, so from the literature. So as I said, the literature, we've analyzed the literature, we've reviewed the literature and identified what the gaps are. And the second half of the slide shows the findings, the analysis from secondary data. So for example, volume of production, how there's been a dip in 2015 and it had picked up in 2018. And unfortunately, I do not have data for 2019, but what we've figured is that 2019 probably would be a bit of a dip year or a drastically dip year because the fish production in the Tonle Sap in the lake was quite low, linked to the fact that there were very little rain, so the fish breeding was a concern, and so there was lack of fresh fish, and then that means that whatever fresh fish that is caught would be sold as fresh and not for processing.
Hey Gayathri.
Sorry, yeah.
Just there's a question in the chat from Amalendu. He's wondering what the units of volume are. Is this metric tons?
Metric tons, yes, sorry. This is metric tons. And then I'm only presenting the inland products here as well. There is the marine sector, marine production. And the marine production is usually roughly only about 1/7 of the inland production volume in Cambodia. And the chart on the right side is the production of the main producing provinces. I haven't included all the provinces. Main producing provinces of processed products in the inland sector. So these are the provinces around the Tonle Sap. This is a change that's been taking place. I won't go into a lot of detail here, but if there are questions, I'm happy to respond to the questions. Also, I think what I should mention here is that this data is from Fisheries Administration, so that's the Department of Fisheries in Cambodia. Time and again, this data had been questioned in terms of accuracy and the way how is it being collected. Can we really rely on this data, or we cannot? You know, there've been discussions. We had the discussion, same discussion at the workshop, scoping phase workshop as well in Phnom Penh. But so we are using the data to understand the trends. So there could be, you know, little differences or big differences here and there. But so we are approaching it from the point that, okay, this is showing us at least, you know, some trends. This is again the production by province. And then on the right side is the number of families that engage in processing by province as well. And this is about the marine products. As you can see, the production is much lower, and there are a couple of provinces that dominate the production in the marine and the coastal sector. And so based on the secondary data that was available to us and the literature review, these are some of the gaps that we identified in for the processing of the dried fish sector in Cambodia. So there's, for example, there's very little studies that have been done on the marine fishing based products. Sorry, whereas the inland or the freshwater products have received quite a lot of attention. There isn't a lot of studies there isn't a lot of focus on the commercialized processing plants. So there's a lot of analysis and studies on the smaller units or the family-based production units, but there isn't a lot of studies available at the higher levels, the medium scale producers or the large scale producers. And this is of course about access. Who can really gain access to these kinds of big producers, because they are always suspect of researchers. They would not give out any kind of production data, income data. It was. I mean, we did try to talk to at least some medium-sized production plants, and that itself was quite difficult, quite challenging. And then, as I already mentioned, there's quite a lot of engagement of women and children that we could see. There was, but again, although there are quite a few studies on women's involvement in the sector, we felt that there could be it can get a little bit more attention. Not a lot on, again, intergenerational knowledge and skills and context transfer, how this is taking place. And this was one of the reasons that we also decided to do a little small in-depth study in the Urusai market, focusing on the women and how what the intergenerational transfer patterns are. Then again, sourcing of fresh fish for processing. Now this continues to be a bit of a challenge, where we cannot really, based on the available studies and the secondary data, understand how much of the fish that is processed, dried, fermented, all of that is coming from wild fish, and how much of it is coming from aquaculture. We do know the production. So we do know, at least roughly from the Department of Fisheries Administration, how much of wild fish is caught and how much of aquaculture fish is produced in Cambodia. But we don't know what are the proportions, and rice field fisheries as well, how much of these are coming into the dried fish value chain in terms of proportions or volumes. That remains a big gap. And this could point towards, actually, or justify a stacked value chain survey in Cambodia, given that, you know, other conditions can fall into place or can be met. And because I mean, we feel that this is one of the original contributions that DFM Cambodia can make in Cambodian context. Again, not a lot on the trade of processed fish. And how the products are flowing within the country and across border as well. And now I move on to some of the findings briefly from the primary data. So these are some of the pictures that I've been taking in terms of trying to map the different steps in the processing. So the picture with the two vehicles, that's actually fish that has come from Thailand across the border. Through Poi Pet, I think. So they were unloading the fish, and the picture in the middle is a group of women seated and preparing the fish on the floor. And on the picture on the right side is where, after the fish is cooked, it's left to, or it's starting the fermentation process. And this product is called MUM, or fermented fish. So that is fish mixed with roasted rice powder. And that's why this color, this reddish color, but what they also say is that they do mix food coloring into the product, because certain consumers apparently prefer the red. They want the red color, the bright red color, so they mix food coloring also into it. Similarly, we've mapped and we've documented the processing, how the processing happens with the different products that Cambodia has in terms of as processed or dried fish. So I'm just presenting one example here. And then we were also trying to understand the diverse range of actors in the value chain. So these would be the fishing families, and then there are these families that engage in both fishing and farming. So it's very seasonal. And what I'm hearing right now, what I'm reading on Cambodia right now, is most of the fishing families actually are shifting to farming this season because the rains are still delayed. It should have started raining already. The monsoon should have come already because this is August, but the rains are delayed, and the rain was delayed last year as well, and the rain season was very short. So the flooding of the lake, that is directly linked to fish reproduction was very low last year. So that is why the fresh fish or the wild fish catch was very low. And seems like the same trend is taking place this year as well, which means that most of the fishing families who even live on the water, so on the floating villages, actually slowly starting to clear land and draw vegetables and other products like chili. And then there are the farming families who actually who process fish only for subsistence. So this is only for their own consumption at home. Then there are families that engage in processing full time, and then there are the processing factories. So this is a bit of a typology of the different types of processors that we encountered in Cambodia. in the freshwater sector, especially. Who is doing this production? Diverse groups. So in this picture, there's ethnic diversity. So for example, the picture on the left bottom corner, it's a group of Muslim, or they're called Cham in Cambodia, in Khmer, who engage in fishing and processing in the marine sector, especially in the coastal sector. And then the picture with the group of women, as I already explained, there are strong gendered elements to fish processing and trading in Cambodia. And then on the right side, the woman that's rowing the boat, she's, I've been told that she's actually Vietnamese, but they're probably the first generation or second generation. So they're born in Cambodia, but they have Vietnamese origin. So in terms of identity, they do speak a little bit of Khmer, but they're more conversant in Vietnamese. So in some of the floating villages, like the top right picture that we visited, looking for production sites or processing sites, some of the people, they could not converse very fluently in Khmer. So my translator had sometimes difficulties in trying to talk to them and get the responses in certain parts of Cambodia on the lake, on the Tonle Sap. So these are the different, one way of understanding the diversity of processes in Cambodia. And there is a range of labor arrangements. Again, analyzing the 56 semi-structured interviews that we did. This is, a table that I drew up. So based on the labor arrangements would change based on the product, the type of processing activity, and then the payment terms could be per day, per ton, per container, or per a kilogram, and then the payment would differ based on that. This quotation is from a wholesaler in a province called Prusat in Cambodia, on the left side of the lake. And she's talking about the cross-border movement of fish. Again, as I said, this keeps coming up in the discussions, but it is very difficult to really pinpoint and say, okay, this type of fish, this amount of fish is coming from Vietnam, from this location in Vietnam, or that this much of a processed product is going to Thailand, or the other way around. So that still remains a bit of a gray area. So this excerpt is illustrating that kind of mixed feelings people have in terms of preference, in terms of quality, where there's Vietnamese prahok. So prahok is fish paste. So she's talking about Vietnamese prahok, how it's local. I mean, this is what she told us, of low quality, and it's also cheaper than the Cambodian fish paste prahok. And these pictures are from her stall, and it's prahok that's in the bottles with the red lids. So that's the fish paste that she was actually referring to, the so-called Vietnamese prahok. I will quickly show two maps, and this is mapping the movement of processed products in Cambodia, but I must say that this is in no way generalizable, because we conducted only 58 semi-structured interviews around the lake, and this is, so we kept asking, using the interview guides, where is your fish coming from? Where are you selling your processed products? Where are you selling it to? And this map sort of illustrates the responses that we got from the traders. So these are the retail and the wholesale traders around the lakes. Again, only the well, this actually includes both the freshwater, so that's around the Tonle Sap, as well as in the marine, in the provinces, in the marine coastal provinces. The word moi refers to a middleman, or a trusted middleman, or a middleman that the processors and the traders trade with based on like, so it's frequent, it's quite steady, and there's a lot of trust involved. So this term, it was actually in one of the discussions we had in the team that Kyoko mentioned this term, MOE, is where you have these constant trade relations between two parties. And we found the concept quite useful, so we kept using it to elicit responses as we went along in our data collection. And this is this is an analysis. This is coming from the rapid survey we conducted in Orusai, so this market is in Phnom Penh, so all the arrows are actually coming to Phnom Penh or going away from Phnom Penh. But again, another set of data illustrated in the same way in terms of movement of fish. This is about, again, trade. As I said, there is very little written on or studied on exports and imports in Cambodia, and I'm personally not very surprised, because this is how fresh fish actually crosses the border. So this was this picture of the vehicle on the left-hand side. I took it in one of the border towns called Poipet, that's bordering Thailand, and fish is actually almost packed or hidden inside that cart. And it's the right-hand side, the right side picture shows how the fish is packed, and it just crosses the border. There's I mean, quite a few studies that document this process, the different payments, informal payments that have to be made. But again, it's quite micro, and it's focusing on one or two border points, whereas there are quite a few other border points for Cambodia. So the movement of fish across borders remains a bit of a black box, if I may say so. Yeah, I'm on my last slide.
No, that's okay. There's one clarifying question again from Amal, sure. Just asking what going 2 slides back.
Sure.
He's asking if you could say a little bit more about the selling source. So the processed fish selling sources. If you could explain a little bit more what you mean by that, and maybe the buying sources. So just to make that distinction clearer.
Right. Okay. So this is coming from the semi-structured interviews that we conducted with the traders in the provinces. So not in Phnom Penh, outside of Phnom Penh, in the provinces. So we asked them, where are you getting your processed fish from? So from where are you sourcing it? And so that's a buying source. So where are you buying it from whom are you buying it, and then to whom are you selling it? So they buy it from the processors and they sell it outside. So the blue arrows are actually the fish going out. So these are mainly from the provincial market. So we found these traders in the provincial markets in Cambodia. Almost every district, so that's actually sub-provincial level, every district has a market, and we could find at least 3-4 processed fish traders in each of these markets. We didn't go to all of the markets, but we went to, I think about, if I remember right, about 15 such markets around the lake, 12 to 15 such markets. And we asked the traders, so where are you getting your processed products from? So those are the green arrows, and who are you selling it to? Those are the blue arrows. So then that is going out.
I would say here, for terminological clarity, instead of using source for selling, I would say destination, because that's source implies an origin, whereas destination is a target.
Sure. Because it's going out. Sure. And as you can see, I mean, people did say that, okay, I'm getting it from Vietnam. So that's in Pursat. You can't really read the name of that province. And Pursat is one of the biggest processed fish producing provinces as well. So it's interesting to see how much of these products are actually coming from Vietnam and how much of it is produced in Pursat. We can't really, from what we have so far, we can't give that detail of up to that level. Also interesting, Pursat and the other province that is slightly south of Pursat, both those Kampong Chhnang, those are the two provinces where we found most of the Vietnamese living on the lake in the floating villages. They could be living on the other side of the lake as well, so Siem Reap, Kampong Thom, but we did so the most of the so-called Vietnamese that we found out from those two provinces. So I think it's also interesting to see the link that they have back with Vietnam in terms of sourcing the products. All right, so I'm going to touch a little bit on the what I thought would be like, you know, cross-cutting or themes that would interest the broader DFM group here. And I'm sure there are many more, but I picked these four, and we can discuss them. If we can discuss others as well if there's interest. So one of the things that I've already touched upon that is quite interesting and quite critical actually to the Cambodia fisheries and processed fish sector is the climate change related impacts. So less rain, lower levels of flooding of the Great Lake, which then directly impacts the livelihoods of the people, their food security, nutrition, because about 70 to 80% of the animal protein in Cambodia is actually sourced from fish, both fresh and processed. So if the production, as the production goes down, those are going to become quite critical issues. And this picture of this boat and the sand sacks in very close to Phnom Penh in Kondal province itself, where the riverbank of the Mekong is actually eroding quite drastically, and it was scary actually to see what was happening to the river and the lake as well. So as what we also figured that, as you know, this year, in the next 5 years, the impact of these climate related changes are going to hit Cambodia quite drastically. There are also development interventions that are discussed in relation to the lower flooding or the lower water levels in the lake, linked to hydropower plants, China and Laos, that is actually damming the water flow into the lake through the Mekong. So it's the natural reasons, the natural elements, as well as the well, so-called natural, if I may call climate change natural, and the man-made development initiatives that's also contributing to this, but will have very direct impacts to the kinds of issues that DFM is interested in studying. And then on the another aspect that came out quite strongly and interestingly is the changing patterns of food preferences in Cambodia, and we've tried to figure out whether there are intergenerational changes, and some people seem to think that the old generation would always, you know, they would prefer the fermented fish paste that has a pretty strong smell and a taste, whereas the younger generation, especially in the urban areas, do not actually want to, they do not prefer that kind of food, so strong, associated with strong smell, taste, as well as they had quality, food quality issues. They were not sure whether this kind of processed products was up to, you know, they had hygiene concerns. What was very clear was that the younger generation did not have the same knowledge and the skills and the experience that their older generation had of processing these products at home, because home-based production happens to a large extent still. So there were women that I met, 40s, 50s, that were making their own fish paste or fermenting their fish or drying their fish. This quite clear. The young people that we spoke to, they were saying, no, we don't know how to do it. I watched my mother doing it, but I don't know how to do it. So that change is already happening. And in terms of again, which I thought would be an interesting, if there are any relevant other country contexts, was the theme of displacement and resettlement. The left bottom picture is of a series of a cluster of houses that were resettled on the riverbank. They used to live in the floating village, but for different reasons, the government had resettled these people on the riverbank, and their conditions were pretty drastic when we visited them. They did not have fresh water to wash their fish or to use in their for their normal household purposes. They had difficulty sourcing their fish. They had difficulty selling their fish. So it was quite a bleak picture for these people. And of course, a big change from living all your life in the floating village on the water to now moving to this space which is neither land nor lake, in a sense. And then on the right side, this is a group of women that we noticed, that we met coming back to Phnom Penh from one of our field visits. One evening, they are going home, or they're going to their temporary home, their boarding places, after a full day of work at the factory, a garment apparel sector, or a garment factory. So we heard lots of stories about how the young both women and men are moving out of the rural areas. They're moving out of, they're not interested in fisheries or fish processing, the fishing sector, because it's not lucrative enough, also because it's harsh conditions when you're engaging in that kind of. So a lot of migration, both internal, within country, from rural to urban or peri-urban, and then across the borders as well, so to Thailand, to Vietnam. So this was quite, it was a recurring theme in the context that we studied. But also now I've read some of the recent studies, reports are saying that they're coming back. So the workers, the migrant workers in Thailand, for example, are now trying to come back, or they've already come back because production or manufacturing in those countries have dropped. And now what are their livelihood options? So they can't go into fishing because they are or drying because there isn't no rains and there are no fish, or there are less fish. So what are the options that these people have? So these are some of the which I thought would be the cross-cutting issues that we can start drawing out as the other countries also complete the scoping phase. And I'm very much interested in hearing from others also about any common themes, any cross-cutting themes. So I will stop with this, and I'm happy to take questions and discuss with you all.
Thank you, Gayathri. That was fabulous. Obviously, huge amounts of material under the surface here. So you've touched on it, but yeah, we can understand from what you've said that there's an enormous amount more to hear. So I hope that will come out a little bit in the Q&A that will now start. As we get into that, though, I thought that perhaps I could ask other members of the Cambodia team, Sarivat, Kyoko, I don't know if Melissa's there, if they have any particular further observations building on what Gayathri has said that might add to her presentation before we go to the general Q&A. So Sarivat, Kyoko, do you have any particular comments?
Yes, again, hi everybody. I would like just to clarify, you may have a doubt or a question why there is a movement of fish export to Thailand and also import from Thailand to Cambodia, and also import export between Cambodia and Vietnam. In fact, you know, in Cambodia still we have natural fish. Most of our Cambodian processed fish, dry fish, are made from natural fish. And processed fish or export fish from Thailand and Vietnam are mostly raised fish, aquaculture. So the quality are different, but the quantity are also different. You can have a huge amount of fish from aquaculture, but natural fish become more and more rare. It become a rare resource. That is why dry fish processed from natural fish is much more expensive, but the quality are completely different. And we can have not enough supply of natural fish or processed fish from natural fish. And there is a good market for export. That is why even locally, sometimes we have difficulty to find natural fish. That's why we can find a lot of imported fish from Vietnam or Thailand, which are mostly 100% raised fish.
That's a fascinating and important observation, Sarivat, and I think that's one that applies beyond also Cambodia. So the decline in availability of wild capture fish for dried fish processing, it ties together sort of broader issues of economic change and cultural preferences. And I think in many cases, we will see people substituting aquaculture fish, but probably not being happy to do so. I certainly think about the Bangladesh context. I think that's going on in Bangladesh as well, and I suspect it's going on elsewhere. So thanks for that observation. We have a question or an observation from Mustafa that came up earlier, so maybe we'll jump over to that, because that also relates to this, to the international exchange of fish and products between different countries. So Mustafa, if you want to jump in and just say a little bit more about your comment, and Ratsana had replied to that as well.
Hi, Gayathri.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Hi.
Yes.
It was a nice presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed. Yeah.
Thanks.
I have one question. Like you told about the exchange between Vietnam and Cambodia, but the country Cambodia also has long border with Thailand and Laos. Is there any exchange going on between Thailand and Cambodia and Cambodia and Laos in the respect of like sourcing the raw fish and processed fish, and also exporting some dried product from Cambodia to those countries?
Yes. So so if I may elaborate a little bit on what Sarivat had also just mentioned, I think to start with, I must say that what we have collected so far from this particular research is is giving us some trends. So, for example, as I already mentioned, we've seen processed, at least a certain amount of processed products coming from Vietnam and Thailand as well. So for example, in the coastal areas, when we went to the markets, the regional markets in the coastal areas, the marine products from Cambodia processed in Cambodia were being sold in these stores, but most of these stores also had products that had come from Thailand. Because you say, for example, you take Koh Kong, this the province that's here. What we were told was that there was products coming through the sea, actually from Thailand. So we saw then, and what was interesting what I saw interesting was that the products from Thailand were actually value added plus. So for example, we found sprats that were coated in sesame. The sesame coated sprats, and they were nicely packed. And then there were, I think the squid, the dried squid, also, I mean, it was nicely packed, looked quite neat and appealing to the consumer. And this was also coming from, we were also told the squid, the dried squid is also coming from Thailand, that there isn't enough squid, fresh squid being harvested in Cambodian waters or by the Cambodian fishermen to dry it. Whatever that's caught is actually sold fresh. So yes, there's definitely certain types of products that are coming into the market, into the Cambodian market. And it was the local people who were buying these, and sometimes it was the people that were living outside the country, but of Cambodian origin. So in almost all the big markets that we went, like in Siem Reap, in the coastal areas as well, when we were hanging out at the market, we saw people that were living outside in, the European countries, the US, Canada, coming to visit their friends, family, and they would always, buy 4 or 5 kilos of different kinds of processed products. So this was also quite evident. And in terms of, just to add to what Sarivat was saying about the fresh fish sourcing, what we've also been told is that, I mean, I completely agree in that it's the aquaculture, the fish that is cultured, it's the aquaculture fish that is coming into the country especially from Vietnam. But it also seems like the fresh fish, the wild fish, wild captured fish is going out from Phnom Penh, from Cambodia. So there is obviously because there is a higher demand for the wild caught fish. In Cambodia, it is very clear that there was a clear preference in terms of the kind of fresh fish that people consumed. So they would always tell us that we prefer the wild fish to aquaculture fish, and they would also tell us how how you can tell the difference between the two products. But also and we heard this in more than one place, that the products that are made from aquaculture or cultured fish, processed products, actually is cheaper than the products that are made from the wild capture fish. So this seems quite an I mean, it's a recurrent theme and an important theme, I think, important sub-theme for Cambodia. And I think this is why it's also important to understand what sort of proportion are these different sources of fish, fresh fish, that are used for processing, because that remains still a gap.
So thanks very much, Gayathri. Kyoko had a comment directly on this, and then after that, I'm going to pass it over to Ratana, who wanted to follow up on an earlier point and then add a new point. So Kyoko, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, because the natural fish going to Thailand, then the cultured fish from Thailand to Cambodia is the case, where, like what Gayathri was saying. But then in terms of processed fish, it seems that the Thai merchants do not like to buy already a fully processed fish from Cambodia. They rather prefer to buy raw fish or semi-processed fish to Cambodia, from Cambodia to finally process in Thailand. So I think that's where this was it. The Cambodians are not able to benefit fully from the process process.
Is that because the Thai wish to capitalize fully on the value addition, or is that they have a mistrust of Cambodian processing practices?
I think it's both.
Okay.
May I add this?
Yes, please.
Yes, in fact, it is not only about processing, it is about packaging. In Cambodia, we have limited capacity to well package. We can process with good quality, but if you do not pack well, your product cannot be kept for a long time, and it cannot be commercialized with an added value, because when you go to market and if you buy something, first you look at the pack. You don't know what is inside. if your pack is very nice, good, then you tend to buy it. And Cambodia, we are very weak in this sense. We can process, but we have very limited capacity of, pack branding, something else. But Thai very strong in this. They have enough facility, so that is why they would prefer to buy fresh or semi-processed fish. They finalize the processing and pack there and commercialize, even export to Europe, to Canada, etc. Like the fish that you brought us, a very nice pack, and we cannot do that. Very nice pack with, brand and information, everything. But for this, in Cambodia, we are weak. We are very big in terms of packing. Yeah.
It's interesting. This conversation speaks to the complexity of the market dynamics both ways, because at the same time, Gayathri was saying that there's this value added plus on the Cambodian side. So if I understand that correctly, it sounds like Cambodian processors are adding an extra layer of value addition in order to present the product in an attractive way within the Cambodian market as well. Is that correct?
No. So this was Thai products. These were Thai products.
Yeah.
So they're nicely packaged. So they come packaged from Thailand, and they sell it in the coastal markets in Cambodia.
Okay.
So everything happens so it talks very much to the point that Saravyat just made.
Okay, very good.
That the Cambodian products are, not so nicely packaged.
Fascinating. Okay. And I know Saravyat's CIRD has worked a lot on this area, but clearly there's more work to be done. So let me pass the floor then over to Ratana. And please go ahead.
Thank you, Derek, and thanks so much, Gayathri and the team. This is fantastic, really, the research. I'm gonna skip the point about aquaculture. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to ask the methodological question instead, just because I think this is a really great learning for others, including the Thai team who's trying to get started in this, right? I could imagine that there's a lot of, once you, I just feel like I'd like to hear more about your decision when you are starting to scope your research and to say that you're gonna because there's so much complexity around this, right? What we just talked about in terms of market and export. So it's not a very well-bounded research topic, right? So how do you go about deciding, what trade you would follow, how well you stop, and any of those kind of tips and suggestions would be very helpful.
Shall I respond?
Please do. Yeah, please.
Okay. So there are, I guess, a series of decisions that we are talking about here, Ratana. So I will pick a few and I'll try to elaborate on those. So, for example, in figuring out the locations. Let's go with this. So in figuring out whether we should be focusing on the inland, the freshwater sector and the marine sector in Cambodia, or where should we put more effort? Because the way the research, the scoping research in Cambodia was structured, that I had about 5.5 months in country. So that already, gave us, it already, restricted certain kinds of, or gave some parameters within which we had to be innovative. So in trying to figure out where should we be spending more time or putting more effort into in terms of trying to collect primary data, we did the initial literature review. The first cut of the literature review was done before I went to Cambodia in October. So that already gave us, and then, the global team had already uploaded quite a few studies, quite a few reports and, papers onto Zotero. So I've gone through those. So this published studies helped us, on the one hand, show that, yes, there'd been quite a big focus on the freshwater, the inland water-based both capture fisheries and the processing sector in Cambodia, whereas the marine sector had received very, very minimal attention. But again, so we had this discussion with Kyoko, Derek, and Sereviat, I think, early on in the project, in the scoping phase, and decided, although there's quite a bit already written on the freshwater, the inland sector, since it's very important, it still seems quite important in terms of volume of production and the number of people that's engaged in the sector, in the processing, that we should still focus on or put more effort into the freshwater. So that's the fishing, the processing around the Tonle Sap, the lake. But at the same time, I mean, at one point, I remember having these discussions with Derek and Kyoko. Should we not go to the marine, the coastal sector, coastal areas at all? But then we decided, since this is going to be the scoping phase, and it's like we want to get sort of like a bird's eye view, of the processing as a whole, we should not completely neglect the coastal based products as well. So which is why we kept it till we kept it as the second part of the primary data collection, but we did not completely ignore it. So that was one of the decision points we made. And then in terms of what kinds of tools to use, so we started off with the already developed semi-structured interview guides, because I mean, I felt that gave quite a good starting point already to get a pretty broad sense of how the sector is organized. So that was basically like the first round of data collection, the semi-structured interviews. But then we figured we do need some in-depth, some focused research. And then we had this series of discussions again with Derek, Kyoko, Sereviat, and Ben also joined some of those conversations as to whether we should do a rapid survey sort of exercise all around the Tonle Sap, targeting the markets, the regional markets, or should we go with one main market, which is Orusai. Why is it Orusai? Again, we made that decision because after we've conducted the semi-structured interviews around the Tonle Sap and the coastal areas, we felt that there seems to be quite a clear indication that a lot of the processed products were either coming from Orusai market, or it was going to Orusai market. So we felt that there was a bit of so it was almost like a hub. And also where Phnom Penh is located, I think geographically that also facilitated this kind of movement of fish. And then we went to Orusai, we found that there were at least, and we counted. So in the Orusai market, we did a mapping of all the processed fish selling stalls, wholesale selling stalls in Orusai by stall number and by products. So we listed all the products and we listed the stall number, and we did like a physical map, which I should have shared and I didn't. So it was based on that map. And when we started counting 80, 90 stalls in that market, and we didn't see that many number of stalls anywhere else, we figured, okay, Orusai is quite important. So there was then counting involved, there were observations and, discussions within the team. We also cross-checked with some of the fact that is Orusai, one of the questions, is Orusai one of the main markets or the main market? And we cross-checked it with or confirmed with experts also. So I remember talking to an expert attached to the research arm of the inland freshwater sector in Cambodia. So we did, so it's almost like triangulation in a sense when we made these decisions as to, okay, should be, this market as opposed to that market. It should be a rapid survey as opposed to an in-depth survey, rapid survey, because as I already explained, the traders would not spend more than, 10, 15 minutes with us. And that itself was a challenge. So, decisions made at different levels, decisions about different activities, different kinds of decisions. And I guess we used different, processes of justification, triangulation, validation to arrive at these?
No, that's very helpful. But actually, it's actually got to my point, because once you decided to go to Orisha, the market,
yes.
yeah, you would then find that they don't exactly what we had the earlier conversation. The products come from other places, including marine fish, farms and others. So it's not anymore about your fresh fish that you're looking at once you get to the market level. But again, that's another layer, I guess, of the analysis discussion that we need to get into. Thanks, that was good. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
so
Ratana.
Just to clarify, so Ratana, in the Urusai market, they also have specialized stalls of the marine products. So there were about
I guess
there were about 8. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's what I meant. I guess that, we were kind of trying to look at these too, right? Because it's hard to almost like differentiate products or, unpack everything and say that this is fresh fish. We're going to follow only those based in Cambodia production around Tonle Sap, or there's going to be other sources or, from elsewhere, and etc. It's kind of mixed, right? And that's the dilemma we're having with a lot of products. Imagine Thailand have everything and selling to everyone and receiving source material from everywhere, So it's really complex, but I really appreciate that you are sharing that insights and knowledge. Thank you. That's fantastic.
Yeah, Ratana, your question puts a finger on a really important issue for DFM. This is a very complex, large picture that we're trying to capture here, and the kind of process that Gayathri describes, I think, is one that will be familiar to all of you once you get into the research, because it has to be adaptive, it has to be organic as we go along, and there are going to be lots of surprises, and there's going to be the need to modify things on the fly. Okay, but as we go along, we will be building a clearer and clearer, better and better picture that will lead toward the second phase of the project. Okay, so we will have more conversations on precisely this. We don't have a great amount of time left, but we do have a couple of other questions from participants, and if you'll permit me, I'm just going to try to summarize those to you, Gayathri, just to be efficient with time. So there's a couple of questions from Tara about the nature of ownership in the sector. So she was hoping that you could say a few words about the ownership of processing units, and has there been any change in the profile of what Tara is calling entrepreneurs in those processing units, and the nature of their entrepreneurship, and any ways in which their kinds of activities or strategies are affecting sort of broader strategies in business. So this is a change question, and specifically, is there any big capital present in the sector in Cambodia? Okay, so this is an important and complex set of questions about ownership in the processing sector. And then Mustafa had another question about whether you observed during the study any use of pesticides or any other illegal or legal chemicals in the processing and preservation of dried or fermented fish products. Okay, so maybe that should give you enough to to wrap out or to finish up the time that we have available. And I'll just say a couple of words at the very end before I let everybody go. Okay, Gayathri, over to you.
Thanks. Tara, if I go to the, maybe it's easier if I go to the table that I've used. Okay, so this table, can people still see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, good. So here, I mean, this is my first attempt at trying to get to exactly the kind of point that you're trying to make, or you're trying to understand in terms of the different kinds of processes. And here I'm quite, I think, consciously not using the word entrepreneur, although I also kept thinking, should we be also looking at literature on entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship linked to Cambodia production and trade. But for now, I haven't really gone down that road, especially looking at the literature. But in terms of the way the way both the literature, so published studies that's available that we've gone through, and the primary data is showing, these seems to be the left column seems to be the kind of like a profile of processors in Cambodia. And your question about about the big guys, the big businesses or the big capital, that would come at the with link to the very last line, the processing factories. And as I already mentioned, there's very little written about these factories, and for obvious reasons, I would say. I think there's mention of at least 5 or 6 very big companies, like private sector companies that engage in processing, and I think they used to be government owned as well. I know Kyoko is much better versed on that side of on this question of the factory. So if we have a little bit of time, I would, and if Kyoko is still around, I would like her to also come in on this question, especially. So in terms of change, as I said, the subsistence, so the people who process products for their own consumption, that's very closely linked to the farming cycle. So during the harvest season, they don't have a lot of time to cook. So then they would cook a little bit of rice and then have the rice with some like fermented fish or dried fish or something like that. So that seems to be a practice, a traditional practice. But this is changing, as I said. So more and more people, even in the rural areas, they seem to be buying these products rather than producing it, processing it themselves. So that's one change that I've seen. Also, I think the other linked factor would be mechanization and technology that people are starting to use. So, for example, I've seen drying ovens that could be used especially during the monsoon, the rainy season, and the non-government sector had done quite a few projects around the lake and in the coastal areas, trying to get the processing the units to the next level. And again, linked to this is what Sarabia brought out earlier about quality, about presentation, about packaging and labeling and branding and things like that. But so these changes are taking place. So slowly, for example, I met one woman who's doing really well in the coast of one of the islands, actually, or off the coastal province of Kokong, who made use of these opportunities, and she's taken her production processing to the next level, where she had a steady demand and things like that. But it still remains, and this is my reading of the context of what's happening. It still remains quite stuck at that level where the production is mainly for local. So it's within the village, within the province, and it's mostly the bulk producers, the big producers, that seem to be able to send products across the provincial boundaries.
Hey, Gayathri, I'll just jump in here because we're at our full time. So right. I'll let the webinar go on for a few more minutes, but I think we shouldn't go more than 5 or so minutes further. If anybody needs to leave, of course, please step out. Just one point here from Cecile, wondering whether there's any evidence of competition for raw material, raw fish from the fish meal poultry feed sector. So if you don't go into that, but did you see any evidence of it?
Yes.
You did. Okay.
Again,
so
again, something to be explored more, though.
Yeah. Okay. So, and that's a very, very pressing issue in India in particular. So a bigger question for the whole project to consider. But yeah, we'd like to have include Cambodia in that conversation.
And the use of chemicals as well.
Yes. So that was the last point I'd like you to speak to.
Okay. So the use of chemicals again. We did. I think I touched briefly on it when I was explaining the food coloring that was used for one of the fermented products. So the discourse seems to be divided. So it's food coloring, therefore it's not bad for you. But whether it's actually food coloring that is being used was a question that we had. So, and then there was, but also what I found interesting about the whole, discussion around food quality, about quality and the chemical use, was on how everybody seems to be saying, okay, it's not us. I'm not putting any chemicals. So this is a processor saying, I'm not putting any chemicals, but the fisherman who caught the fish, he used some poison to kill the fish first. So now the poison is already inside the fish when I'm processing it. So it's not me. The retailer would say it's actually the wholesale guy or the wholesale person who want to keep the fish for 1 year. So he's putting chemicals into it, but I don't do it. It's her. So I found this, blaming the other quite interesting in terms of, use of chemicals, but no one denied it. No one completely denied that we are completely, chemical free. But also at the same time, no one, and I guess understandably, no one really was really, upfront. So again, something, that needs like proper laboratory tests, I would say, in order to figure out what is really the composition, what's really in these processed products. And I mean, visually, after seeing this, how most of the production processes, I had questions personally myself about the quality very clearly. So yes, that is definitely a big concern.
Okay, thanks very much. There's a final point from Madhu here about, this is a broader point for the project, but she's saying how clearly the importance of gender is in understanding the social economy of dried fish, and then suggesting that sort of as a general methodological rule that all data collection within the project have a sex disaggregated approach as sort of a core reference point. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense and something that we should certainly keep in mind as a project. Okay, so let me then just say a couple of words of conclusion. And from, as you may have noticed, Gayathri, from the comments, there's a general perception that this was an extremely interesting and rich presentation, and I would second that. It's been wonderful, and I think it's a great benchmark for all of us in terms of the potential that the scoping research has. And there are a lot of lessons also from the research that we can take forward. So thanks very much. It was great. Specifically, I think we have to think more about how we present the movement of fish and products visually. I think what you made a good start with your maps, but I think we have to think about how to do that even more effectively. And so that's an issue I'd like to take forward with the DFM group as a whole. Okay, so with that said, then I'd just like to look forward to the next couple of webinars that we have planned. The next one that we're thinking of probably around mid-September is a less specific and more general discussion at the project level of sort of planning within the context of COVID of how to manage the project. And so there are a couple of things that I'd like to come out of that. One is to increase the communications across the project between the different research teams as we engage in that process of adaptation. And then the second one is to think about ways of perhaps formalizing some of the attention to cross-cutting themes of the type that Gayathri mentioned. And so whether we want to set up some cross-cutting themes working groups as was anticipated in the proposal or not, or how we want to frame those, these are the kinds of things I want to talk about in that webinar. And then the second webinar following that will be, again, a more focused one, and that one will be looking at data management and coding around the use of NVivo as a platform. Okay, and so we'll be thinking about organizing that perhaps late September, beginning of October. And hopefully by then we'll have greater clarity on how plausible it is to get back into the field for all of the different research teams. Okay, so that brings this webinar to a close, and thanks very much everyone for participating, and thank you especially Gayathri for such a stimulating presentation. All right, so there are a couple of us who I'd like to stay on board. Gayathri, Eric, Kyoko, if you can manage it, Sarevat, if you can manage it. And then I'd like to say goodbye to the rest of you. Thanks very much again for joining.